Hello, students. First off, I'm recording this because I regret that in our class on Tuesday, I did not record this. So now I'm doing this so we can make sure that we have a catch up for it and we can finish and then move on Thursday with the remainder of discussion on Chapter 5. So without further ado, let us move on to talk about the channel decisions. And when last we met, we were talking about the 8 factors that need to be considered for channel intensity. So remember, this chapter is about 3 things. Intensity, which are the number of outlets that we have. The intensity could be hundreds of retail outlets. Channel type, which would be each unique individual type, meaning retail, online, buy online, pick up in store. Those are the channel types. And then finally, dual distribution, which we'll talk about on Thursday. And that'll be whether or not you have your own, in essence, vertical market while you're doing traditional channel system. So as we talked about in our last one, if you notice, we talked about having channel competition to prevent complacency. And what this generally meant is that we want to be able to have as many outlets as possible so that there is some intra-brand competition. We want to be able to spread that out so that each channel member feels like they have a stake and that they need to be able to have superior numbers versus the competition. You know, sometimes manufacturers will actually help weaker retailers just so that there is a spreading out so that the competition doesn't feel like, or let's just say that the downstream members don't feel like that they can be complacent, that they don't need to strive. And so in a quasi-monopoly, when we give one single downstream partner the venue to be able to distribute all of what you have, the difficulty with that is that it creates a relaxation, a complacency, a belief that in essence you don't have to work as hard. I've always been a firm believer that for Starbucks needed to create a younger, edgier Starbucks because I think competition is a good thing. It keeps each of the departments and the divisions from just relaxing on their own laurels. So Best Buy, way those many years ago, bought a group called Future Shop, which was kind of a different kind of electronics outlet, and they actually kind of left it open because they wanted to be able to do 2 things. One of them is that it blocks entry by another third party who would want to compete against Best Buy. In essence, this becomes what's called a flanking corporation. So you kind of cut off competition on the ends, but then also it's there to be able to constructively be able to create a little bit of healthy competition with each other. The next is we talked about product category. And of course, this was when we were discussing the 4 categories of convenience, shopping, specialty, and unsought goods. And depending on which category those particular items are in, ultimately determines what kind of distribution you want. So we also talked about FMCGs, which are fast-moving consumer goods, and they, in essence, are usually in what's called the convenience level as well. So convenience goods, generally, you want to have intensive distribution. You want to be able to distribute them in as many possible outlets as you can. Shopping goods, by their very nature, need to have a certain amount of selectivity in them. So in essence, because there's an encouragement of comparison with brands and prices, you tend to be a little bit more selective in your distribution of those particular items. Specialty goods usually are those goods that are unique and sought out, and they tend to be highly selectively distributed, or you could even say exclusively distributed. If I see either selective or exclusive distribution on the test, it's fine, all right? Both of those will work, okay? But remember that selective distribution is when manufacturers very carefully select, cultivate, and support appropriate outlets in their particular trade area. Remember that all distribution tends to be selective in nature. You want to be able to critique each particular outlet that you're using, but specialty distribution is even more so. So, moving on to factor 3, let's talk about that exclusive distribution. So there's two particular types of brand strategies that would require exclusive distribution. One of them is a premium positioning brand strategy, where you are attempting to signal the superior capabilities of your particular item, and it has unique functions, and it justifies a premium price. Generally, these are goods that have very unique qualities. Luxury watches would be an example. And it's this high quality and the positioning of high quality that basically relies on scarcity. And so, because it relies on scarcity to create value, you want to be able to have it in as few places as possible. I talked about diamonds when we were in class on Tuesday. Diamonds are very selective, and the De Beers Corporation, which controls the vast majority of diamonds in the world, limits the amount of coverage of those diamonds to be able to create this premium positioning strategy that they have. Remember that high-end brands often will combine selective distribution with an insistence on restrictive contracts. And as I talked about before, Walmart does a very good job of selling what you would consider to be the vast majority of consumer goods in the Walmarts and then, of course, in the Best Buys. But when it comes to Apple and their the MacBook Pros and their computers, you find that they're very selective with those because it's a premium brand strategy. And so you only find those in universities, at Best Buy, and then, of course, at Apple stores. So that's premium positioning. Niche positioning has to do with a very narrow, specialized group of buyers that have some unique idiosyncratic knowledges that is so important that it requires a significant understanding. And so, that in mind, if I give you an example of skis, all right, skis requires, it's a very unique niche market. It's only for a specific time during the year. Generally, it's a narrow, specialized group of buyers. And so generally, they're not distributed in large locations. Of course, you do have like Academy Sports, but generally they tend to be in a very narrow range. And so that would be what I would call exclusive distribution, okay? If I want to be able to exert a certain amount of authority when it comes to using my brand, especially when it comes to being in the right place at the right time, and being able to direct the way it is sold and to be able to control that particular brand downstream, then I'm going to want to be selective in the outlets that I choose. I can be selective, and when I do that, what I do is create reward power. Now, we haven't talked about reward power yet. That'll come when we're talking about chapters 10 and 11. Reward power is basically the ability to give out, literally as it says, rewards when it comes to be able to influencing people. So in other words, for the proper behavior, you give out a certain reward. Power is the ability of B to influence A into doing something that they may not ordinarily do. And so in being selective, I can offer protection from intra-brand competition. That, in essence, is reward power. Now, if I have a generic heterogeneous kind of channel where I'm selling products that generally are alike, I have a lot of difficulty being able to exert influence because quite simply, the substitution of those particular items is large. If I'm doing, let's just say, thumb drives, there are many outlets for thumb drives, many manufacturers for those. And so I may have limited influence in trying to get Best Buy able to put my thumb drives out and find them a special place. All right. Here's a key statement. I said it before, and I want you to kind of sink this in. Intensive distribution creates a large but ineffective army of indifferent channel members. Quite simply, if I don't have influence, if I can't be able to make one group do something versus another, there are several reasons why. One of them, quite simply, is the substitutability and the fact that they can be gotten anywhere. It means I carry them, but do I care about them as a particular product? Not really, all right? If the organization represents a handful of resources, I can offer greater rewards. I have more power and I have more influence. The balance of influence, the inverse of that is what's known as dependence, okay? So what dependence balancing means, and if you look at the slide where it says trading territory exclusivity for category exclusivity, what that basically means is this, is I will give you this particular territory, but if you're going to use this particular territory for this product, I want you to limit the different brands that you sell, all right? So what it means is it requires one side, in essence, to depend more on another. So if I'm the only distributor of this particular product, but I only have this one item in this particular category, then there's a high mutual dependence, all right? Mutual dependence is a good thing, all right? To be the need for both sides to depend on each other in a mutual fashion means that we will exclude others when it comes ultimately to determining what are the best goods for me to sell, all right? Mutual dependence means that we count on each other. And if I'm only looking at your particular brand and I need to be in that particular category of goods that I'm selling, then that's a high dependence, all right? Conversely, if I am the downstream partner and I am the only outlet in this territory for my particular manufacturer, I have a high level of dependence on you as well. Both of these things are not bad because dependence basically builds relationships. So the balance of power also comes into the dependence. And so how we go about balancing our dependence ultimately determines many times, especially if it's a shopping good, whether we're going to have success. So we talked about this before. Many trade areas are so lucrative that they don't necessarily need to be worried about category or even brand exclusivity in a given area. We live in Boone. Boone has about 18,000 people in the city, about 20,000 in the university. It's a fairly good, robust trading area. But let's compound that or look at that in terms of Hickory. Hickory in the 5-county area has something like 330,000 individuals. The main reason our campus there is that it's the largest area in North Carolina without a four-year university. It is a very robust, dynamic retail area that drives a lot of business. And so in terms of a concession of whether or not we're going to have exclusivity, especially as a downstream partner, if I recognize that there's an enormous competitive intensity in that particular product category, especially in a large market, then I am going to be hesitate about limiting the brands that I carry because there is enough for everyone, okay? I hesitate to grant selectivity in categories that are intensely competitive because I know that I have the numbers of people coming in that will drive success, okay? Remember that in shopping, shopping needs requires to be able to have goods to shop against. And so opportunity cost, what that means is what we give up in order to pursue what we have, all right? And so with an opportunity cost that I would say is not important, by all means, as an upstream partner, I can't necessarily tell my downstream partners what they can limit themselves to, okay? The level of competition also means that I may not be able to have a lot of high profits in this particular area, but I'm driving so many sales that it is sufficient enough for me to be able to stay in the game. And so, opportunity cost. Balance this. If you remember in our first classes when we talked about the reasons for having channels, realize this is that it can be enormously expensive in certain areas to be able to negotiate and do traditional channel systems. I've often thought about writing a paper on Boone because Boone is very much like an island economy. It costs a lot to get goods from there to here. I said this before in class, when I lived in Montgomery, the cost of living in Montgomery is 60% of what the cost is to live in Boone. And so like my property, if I were to, it's like valued at $500,000, which is crazy. But if I were to have that very same value in Montgomery, I would not only have the house, but I'd probably have about 300 acres at the same time. And so what transaction cost means is that in terms of the economies of scale, it might be more efficient, quite simply, if I have fewer individuals out there that are that I'm dealing with rather than more. Because realize, just think of the effort that it takes to be able to do all of the things of the 9-channel functions. Remember, the fewer number of individuals mean the fewer lines of communication, but also the less expense as well. Contrary-wise, fewer brands, offer less as well. Now, just remember, fewer trading partners may tend to lead to lower transaction costs. And that's ultimately what you're trying to do, is you're trying to be able to balance the total cost of doing business versus the cost of having more than one partner out there. Finally, the other strategies are that there may be more than one reason why you're going out and looking for generating downstream partners in terms of intensity. You may be just trying to build your brand. In other words, you're out there trying to generate as many different individuals knowing about your brand, especially when you're starting out from the very beginning. It is easier to tolerate high intra-brand competition when the brands that you have are so valuable that people come to you for them. Once again, this is why Walmart, with all of their strength, it is more than happy to have a select number of items that they sell in terms of Apple products, because quite simply, the brand is so strong that they will carry their own clientele with them. And so this is the reason why you, especially with brand building, you may ignore certain things like, especially if it's a shopping good, ignore what you would think of selecting distribution and have intensive as well, because you're trying to build the brand. So those are channel intensity. Now we're talking about channel type. Remember that channel type is about all of the processes that we use to select, to purchase, to order, and to receive a product. One of the big unique difficulties that we have, especially when it comes to channel type, is we have a lot of difficulty understanding where or how the original process starts. Channel type decisions, especially when it comes to the omni-channel, disrupt what we call channel equity, because we quite simply don't know many times the consumer journey from the moment that they select all the way to the way they receive their product. All right. Remember that if merchandise appears in different types, there are different service outputs as well that require different functions and even different price points as well. If we are generally buying our goods from a general merchandise individual, and in other words, what that means is that we're quite simply buying those goods from either the closest location or the cheapest, we may be, in essence, shorting ourselves in what we expect in terms of the value and the experience that we might need. So if I go to a Lowe's home improvement center and I go to buy a chainsaw, then I will receive that chainsaw in a box, and the rest I leave up to myself. If I go to buy a steel tool from a steel distributor, the steel distributor will not allow me to leave until they have some assurances that you know how to use it, you know how to take it apart, or let's just say you know how to put it together, and they, in essence, will do all of those things for you. Steel is one of the great American success stories. They have 15,000 dealerships in the United States alone. Some 11,000 of those dealerships sell steel tools only. They expected an enormous amount from their retailers, and they receive it. And that type decision, where you have different service outputs and perform different functions, is what makes the steel tool so valuable. Steel tools generally are 30 to 40% higher in terms of price than other ones that you could buy from a Lowe's, but you receive value for value. And so when it comes to channel type, very many times you will receive different values for being able to perform the same functions, but consumers receive that value, tend to be in more experience and basically in a greater knowledge by the individuals who sell you those particular items. So, just to give you an example, what are some of the positive effects? Well, here we go. So, excuse me. So, as I said before, buyers tend to exploit the multiple routes of being able to go to the market. And so when you find consumers, they will do what's called cherry picking. They will find their own ways to be able to go buy those certain items. And so you'll find that they will do information search from the very beginning. In my own time, I use the web to find that information out. In a large ticket item, consumers will actually go to where it is to be able to see the item for themselves, and they may actually have it delivered to their own homes. And so what this means is that there are many positive side effects for having multiple ways in which you can deliver goods to the consumer, because the consumer can pick and choose what they consider the value best, its best use. All right. So remember, this is that you're more likely to provide service outputs that are valued by buyers when you have different ways in which those goods can be delivered. And you can allow the consumers to be able to find those in whatever way they wish, because that's what consumers do. So remember about cannibalism. Cannibalism is when sales from one channel type rob themselves from sales from other channels. All right. Valuable lesson when it comes to channel types is that hopefully what you're doing is you are segmenting by the way that consumers want those things brought to them. Of the 4 options, selecting, purchasing, order, and receiving, okay? You're given 4 of those options, okay? And you can use any way that you wish, all right? And allow the consumer to find whatever they consider to be their best way, because actually that's what you hope for. Cannibalism is when one channel robs sales from another. Hopefully what you're doing is you're providing a broad enough brush of different channel types so that the consumers are not, in essence, there is no reason to come up with another channel route if all you're doing is coming after the same consumers. All right. So the last part of this is, how do we go about? Well, we go through a process. We identify the pool of candidates for a certain type of format. We evaluate them based upon their synergy and the brand's position. We negotiate, we look at each other's needs and concerns, and then finally we implement them. The one thing that I want to say about this is you need to decide which channel type you want first, then you can choose the channel members. All right, that covers that section that we had in class on Tuesday. And so I will see you on Thursday and we'll finish this up. Thank you much. Bye.